Have you ever realized you're living like a phone stuck at 5%? You still function, you still reply, you still show up, still smile on cue, still say I'm fine, but the first thing that disappears is the energy it takes to care. Not because you hate people, not because you're heartless. You're just out of battery for emotions. And the scary part is you don't shut down all at once. You fade. Bad news hits and you don't flinch. You see someone hurting and you understand, but you can't reach it. A message pops up and your brain goes, not right now. You start looking cold, but inside, it's not coldness, it's overload. This video isn't a be positive lecture, no moral sermon. It's a psychological autopsy. Why good people can start looking emotionally numb, how empathy turns into shutdown, and why not caring is sometimes not a choice but a nervous system defense after being overused for too long. If you've been afraid you're turning into someone else, stay. You might not be changing, you might just be depleted. If you pay attention, numbness rarely starts with a dramatic turning point. It starts small and it starts logical. You reply less, you check in less, you stop explaining. Not because you suddenly dislike people, but because every interaction now feels like a fee. And when you're paying too many fees every day, your brain cuts whatever isn't immediately required for survival. Here's the mistake people make. They think empathy is just a good trait, so if they lose it, they must be becoming a worse person. But empathy isn't only morality, it's biology and it's expensive. You have to focus, read signals, imagine, feel, respond the right way, tolerate discomfort. It's like running a heavy app in the background. When your battery is full, it runs smoothly. When your battery is low, the system starts closing apps, and the emotion app is usually one of the first to go. That's why you end up in a frustrating state. You still understand what's happening, but you don't feel it the way you used to. You see someone hurting, and you know they're hurting. You hear bad news, and you know it's bad. But inside, there's no wave. Not because you don't care, but because your body is conserving energy for what it thinks you must do. Work, earn, stay responsible, hold yourself together, not collapse. So this kind of not caring isn't a lack of heart, it's load shedding. Your brain does something brutally practical. It lowers sensitivity, flattens emotional range so you can keep moving. People interpret it as coldness, but it's often survival mode. You didn't lose your character, you lost your battery. And because it happens quietly, you misread yourself. You tell yourself, I've changed. But the truth might be, you didn't change. You've been overused for so long that your nervous system chose the cheapest way to stay alive, turning down the capacity to care. You think emotions just happen, but emotions require a very specific condition. Your brain needs space to process. To feel sadness, compassion, tenderness, you have to stay in the moment long enough for your nervous system to form the response. And the modern problem is we rarely stay anywhere long enough. Not because we don't care, but because our minds keep getting pulled elsewhere. Your day looks like this. You wake up to notifications. You work while replying. You eat while scrolling. You listen while calculating what you're behind on, what you owe, what you can't mess up. You're not just busy, you're in fragmented attention, a life where your brain keeps switching tabs. And when attention gets chopped up, emotion gets chopped up with it. Because emotion isn't information. Emotion is a process. Your brain has to hold context, allow sensation to rise, stay with it long enough for it to move through the body. But in constant interruption mode, your brain prioritizes what feels urgent deadlines, money, responsibility, self-image. Emotion, because it isn't required for immediate survival, gets pushed into the queue, and that queue sometimes never gets processed. So you enter a modern state. You understand, but you don't feel. You know the story is sad. You know the person needs you. You know you're supposed to react, but inside there's silence. Outsiders call it cold. You call it something worse. But the explanation can be simpler. Your feelings didn't disappear. They got stuck behind a brain with no bandwidth. And when they're stuck, they show up in the wrong place. Flat during the day, heavy at night, a sudden tight throat in the shower, tears from a random song. That's your system, finally finding a small window of space to process what it postponed all day. Not because you're fake, because you're living in a rhythm that gives emotion no chance to arrive on time. So part 2 lands here. Some people aren't numb, they're scattered. And when the mind is scattered, emotion doesn't have the conditions to fully form the way it used to. Here's a brutal truth. A lot of the time you're not numb because you lost your heart. You're numb because your body is living like the threat never ended. And when the nervous system stays there too long, it can't afford full, soft, deep emotion anymore. It has to conserve. It has to shrink the range. Humans were built for short-term stress, threat surge, resolution, recovery. Modern life creates stress with no clear ending. It doesn't hit once and stop. It licks money, work, deadlines, the future, comparison, the pressure to be okay, the pressure to move fast. And when your body can't see an ending, it never truly exits alarm mode. At first, you become more reactive, more anxious, more irritable, more tense. But if it lasts, your system can't stay on fire forever. It shifts into a different mode, one that looks like emotional coldness, partial shutdown. Not because you can't feel, but because if you keep feeling intensely, you'll burn out. The brain chooses a practical strategy. Lower sensitivity, lower amplitude, keep you functional. So you start feeling flat. Life passes through a layer of glass. Bad news doesn't shock you. Good news doesn't lift you. You're not exactly sad, not exactly fine, just tired. And that tiredness isn't in your muscles. It's in your nervous system, a system that's had to hold itself together for too long. And this matters. Deep emotion requires a minimum level of safety. To soften, to care fully, to connect, your brain has to believe you have enough energy to handle what comes with opening the door. Under chronic stress, opening the door feels risky because opening means more input, more responsibility, more pain, more processing. So you close it, you go quiet, you react less, and you mistake that for a new personality. But this isn't cold, it's defense. It's your body saying, I can't take more. Outsiders see silence. They don't see the baseline underneath. A system always tense, always bracing, always controlling. And after living like this long enough, numbness stops being temporary. It becomes a configuration, a version of you optimized for endurance, not resonance. Not because you chose it, but because your body learned that being moved is a luxury. Here's a modern paradox. You're exposed to too much suffering while having almost no power to change it. You open your phone and it's accidents, illness, violence, betrayal, collapse, war, despair. Pain is no longer limited to your immediate world. It floods in from everywhere, all the time. And your brain, no matter how strong, was never built to carry infinite tragedy. Real empathy isn't light. It's not just feeling bad. It's nervous system simulation. You see it, you imagine it, you partially step into it, and your body responds. Each time costs something. If you take in dozens or hundreds of fragments of suffering every day through news, social media, or people around you, what happens isn't that you become worse. What happens is overload. And under overload, the brain does something brutally practical. It turns the volume down. At first, you still feel grief, compassion, anger. Then you get tired from feeling too much. Then you start avoiding scroll faster, mute, I can't watch this. And eventually you witness something serious and nothing moves inside. Outsiders call that heartless. The nervous system calls it flood control. The sharpest part is that empathy today often becomes obligation. You don't just witness pain, you're expected to perform the right reaction. Express, comment, care, speak up, take a side. So now it's not just suffering, it's social pressure layer on top. And when someone is depleted, they don't just lose emotional battery, they also lose the energy to perform care. So you withdraw, you ask less, you listen less, you engage less, you stop taking on other people's stories. Not because you're selfish, but because you know if you open the door again, you'll get pulled into something you don't have the strength to carry. Over time, that withdrawal looks like coldness, but it's often a survival boundary. So part 4 lands here. You might not be numb. You might be living inside a volume of suffering that exceeds what a human nervous system can process. And when the brain has to choose between feeling everything and staying alive, it chooses staying alive. It shuts parts of it down. There's a phase a lot of people enter without having words for it. You don't stop caring because you don't want to. You stop because deep down your brain starts believing caring doesn't change anything anymore. Think about how many times you genuinely tried to communicate, tried to save a relationship, tried to help someone, tried to fix a family pattern, tried to do better so life would feel less heavy. And what happened? Things snapped back. People stayed the same. Circumstances stayed the same. The problem remained. And every time that repeats, your brain doesn't just record the event, it extracts a lesson. Emotional investment here is a loss. That's why you start looking like you can't be bothered. But it's not laziness, it's emotional divestment. Your brain runs a cold equation. Caring equals pain plus energy drain plus no outcome. And once that pattern repeats long enough, the brain starts cutting the investment before you even step in. You're not excited anymore. You don't explain as much. You don't fight to be understood. You don't want to hear another story. Not because you're arrogant, but because your system learned to avoid a losing bet. So you drift into whatever posture. But whatever here isn't an attitude, it's a defense against disappointment. You expect less because expectation is the doorway to pain. You care less because caring is the doorway to depletion, and you become flat. Not because you have no emotions, but because you no longer trust your emotions to land anywhere safely. The most dangerous part is how invisible it looks. You still function, you still work, smile, reply, but in the moments that require real presence, when someone needs you, you hear one sentence inside, "I don't have the strength." And then you start fearing yourself, reading that withdrawal as moral decline. But sometimes it's just the brain doing what it does. After too many disappointments, it stops betting. And that's the final landing. When you run out of energy to care, it's often not because you're heartless. It's because you cared long enough to learn that caring can hurt you without saving anything. And your brain, to keep you alive, closes the door before you break one more time.